My name is Benjamin Genocchio, and I'm the director of the Armory Show, New York's oldest and largest art fair. I was born in Australia. My mother's Australian, my father's Italian. I studied arts and law at the University of Sydney, but as a child I'd lived in Colombia and South America, so I grew up speaking Spanish. And once I'd completed my arts degree and studied law, I decided I wanted to do a doctorate in art history. So I completed a doctorate in art history with a specialization in Latin American art, and then I taught at the university in Australia, and then I began working for newspapers in Australia, and I covered the visual arts in Australia and in Asia, and I traveled and worked and lived in Asia extensively, so I lost a little bit of contact with Latin America and became more of a specialist in contemporary art in Asia and the Pacific. And then I moved to New York in 2001 and began working for the New York Times. And I worked for the New York Times for 10 years. And then I moved into publishing and became the editor-in-chief of Art and Auction magazine and Modern Painters magazine and artinfo.com, which was an early website on the visual arts. And then 3 years ago I left that position and joined ArtNet and started essentially my own 24-hour art news site called ArtNet News, which was very successful. And at the moment ArtNet News employs 20 journalists around the world and is the world's largest and most popular daily art news source. And then in January this year I was offered an opportunity to take over the Armory Show. I don't come from an art fair background, but as somebody that's lived and worked in New York for nearly 20 years and has an intimate knowledge of the fair and understanding of what the conditions of success for an art fair are, it was felt that I would be an appropriate candidate for that job. I thought about it for some time, and in the end I thought, you know what, this would be an interesting challenge and also a lot of fun and a great honor to be asked to be in charge of this fair, New York's oldest, largest, most established art fair, and so I thought this would be something terrific to do, and so I took the opportunity. I think the art market itself has changed dramatically in the last 20 years, in the last 10 years, in the last 5 years, and it continues to change dramatically. One of the things that has happened, I think, is you've seen an increasing regionalization of the art world and the art market. 10, 15 years ago there were only a handful of art fairs, 5 or 6 around the world, and the collectors would travel around to each of the fairs. But then we've seen a proliferation of galleries, a proliferation of franchise gallery outposts, as well as the franchising of fairs and the setting up of fairs. And the difference today is that essentially the dealers and the fairs now serve the collectors where they live, rather than the collectors traveling to a few destinations to buy art. So in the past, New York more or less had a lock on the contemporary art market. In order to buy the work of many important artists, you really needed to buy and sell through New York. But now with so many galleries having outposts in different places and so many other galleries operating around the world and so many fairs providing galleries opportunities to show the work of artists in different cities, many collectors don't need to travel so much anymore in order to get access to artists. They can be serviced where they live. Now the challenge for an old and established art fair like the Armory, and this is the same for old and established art fairs like Cologne and Arco and to some extent the Basel fairs, is that you need to accept the regionalization of the market. Now in the case of the Basel fairs, they decided they were going to franchise their fairs. So they understood that there was an increasing regionalization, and what they sought to do was create other versions of their fair in different places. So they have a fair in the United States, in Miami, that services the American audience. They have one in Europe, here in Basel, services Europeans, and one now in Asia that services Asians. Now the good thing about that is that they get to have a brand that they can build globally, and they can leverage the fact they have more than one business, and so there are great economies of scale. The challenge, of course, for them is then trying to get Americans to visit their fair in Switzerland or Asians to come to Miami. So in a way, to some extent, they benefit by franchising their fair, but they also split their audience. Now, in the case of a fair like the Armory Show, which is not a franchise fair, it's a one-off fair once a year, we don't have the opportunity that they do to build a global brand by having many Armory Shows in different places. So what we have to accept is that we don't have the resources to build a business, and we have to compete with all of these other fairs. And we end up becoming just one regional fair like all of the others. The value and the advantage we have is that we are a regional fair in the world's most important regional market, which is New York. So the Armory Show succeeds and thrives because it's based in essentially still the capital of the contemporary art market. So we're able to attract to the Armory Show enormous numbers of people. We get over 180 museum groups from across the United States and the world that are registered and come to the fair. I'm not sure there's any fair in the world that has that many registered museum groups. We simply don't have the infrastructure to manage that and need to outsource it to a private company to manage. So we are essentially a regional fair, but we're in the world's most important regional market. And what we offer is an opportunity for galleries either in New York or around the world to access the strong collecting community that's located in New York, that's located in Chicago, that's located in Boston, that's located in Philadelphia. So in that sense, we are still very much the American fair, and people want access to our fair so they can access the collecting community that comes and has come to the Armory Show for 25 years. So I think that's its strength, but that's also its place in a changed global landscape, both for art fairs and for the art market. Well, you know, the Armory Show is a New York institution. It is the child of Chelsea. It was founded in its modern iteration in 1994 by a group of New York dealers who were not allowed to show contemporary art in the Art Dealers Association Fair. The oldest fair in New York is an Art Dealers Association Fair. It's a trade fair run by the art dealers. It's a small fair. And in the mid-1990s, they would not allow contemporary art to be shown at that fair. And so a series of dealers in New York, Matthew Marks, Colin Delan, Pat Hearn, started their own fair in the Gramercy Park Hotel. That was also the same year in 1994 that Matthew Marks opened the first gallery in Chelsea. So that's why the Armory Show is very much the child of the Chelsea contemporary art world that grew up and became the world's largest and most important consolidation of contemporary art galleries, and where the most amount of contemporary art is bought and sold on a day-to-day basis anywhere in the world. So the Armory Show was born by those dealers. It grew up to service that need and grew to support Chelsea in New York as a contemporary art capital. And so it's very much tied to that history of New York as a contemporary art capital, and it's very much tied to the development of the market for contemporary art in New York. And so I'm not sure it makes sense for that fair, given its history, given its association with New York. For instance, our partner is MoMA. We support acquisitions at MoMA for the fair. We also donate money to cancer foundations that support artists that don't have money for medical care. So it's essentially a fair that's very much connected to the contemporary art community in New York. And so I think to move beyond that, you need to look seriously at what the purpose of that would be. And I think in this day and age, fairs that are born in regional centres by people that are connected to those communities tend to make more sense than franchise fairs moving into those places. And I think this is one of the challenges that Frieze deals with in New York, that essentially they're looking to franchise what is a London fair in a New York environment, and why the idea of a tent in Regent's Park may work, but it doesn't work on Randall's Island in the middle of the East River. And so there are enormous challenges with taking a brand like the Armory Show and trying to introduce it in a community where you have no history, no connection, no relationships with the people. And so, you know, while I'm not ruling out the idea that the Armory Show at one point could franchise into another fair, I think the art world has changed. I think the conditions for success in having a franchise fair operation are very different, and the Basel community and company has done a very good job of that, but they're also an art fair company. That's all they do, and so they're invested in building the infrastructure that's required to manage fairs on a global level in different places. And so I think there are many practical questions that go into this. I think the fairs have become a de facto ranking system for galleries, and in and among that, what's happened is that you now have a ranking system for fairs. And I think the only fair that really operates on a global level is probably the Basel fairs, because they're able to invest so much money in providing services. Now, certainly I think Frieze has tried to compete with them, but they're not able to offer the level of service that the Basel fairs are able to offer. I think most people will tell you that there are too many fairs, and that there's an argument that not all of those fairs will or should survive. I don't really know the answer to that. I think fairs essentially service their clients, who are the galleries, and the galleries in turn are looking to connect with local clients who are collectors. So the extent to which a fair, wherever it is, can service the needs of its clients, who are the galleries and the collectors, then I think there's a compelling reason for them to exist. Now, not all fairs are functioning businesses. Some of them, for instance, like Arco, is heavily supported by the Spanish government for tourism purposes. So the dealers operate with deep discounts. They fly in the collectors to buy. Or, for instance, the fairs in the Gulf nations are supported by the local government or individuals because they have a broader cultural purpose. In the case of the Armory Show, it's a very strong and functioning business located in the world's most important regional market. We receive around 700 and something applications from galleries around the world every year for 200, 220 spots. And so the demand to participate is definitely there. And we also have the history and tradition and relationship with the collectors. And so many of the dealers want to come in order to access those collectors. I mean, we have a VIP database of 22,000 people that they've been building for 25 years. And so that kind of connection between the galleries and the clients is really what makes an art fair operate. And I think if the fair can deliver the collectors to the galleries, then there's a compelling reason for it to exist as a business. But as I said, not all fairs function as businesses. Well, I mean, there are a few questions there. The question of the challenge of the digital world to the contemporary art market, that's a big and difficult question, and I think there's certainly room for transformation in the way art is bought and sold online. The extent or the pace at which that change will happen is unclear to me. As someone that's worked for 20 years in journalism and watched the way in which the internet transformed the buying and consumption of information. To some extent, people still want a physical experience with artwork, and the more expensive the artwork, the more they want the physical experience. So I think you're going to find the future of the art market online will be what I call click and mortar, all right? That instead of the brick and mortar business, which is a physical structure, it will be part physical structure, but it'll be part online. So it'll essentially remain click and mortar. That is, it'll be part online and part physical structure. But I don't think the art market is going to go entirely online. So that would be my answer to that for the minute. As to the future of the market itself, I mean, it seems very strong. The discovery of artwork as an asset class by the finance community has injected an enormous amount of money into the art system. It's also created a kind of a credit structure that underpins the art world, in which large amounts of money are now loaned to dealers and to collectors and to buyers of artwork, and that finances and fuels higher prices, greater transactions, more fluidity. So the pushing of money into the contemporary art market through the finance sector has grown the art market tremendously in the last 5 to 10 years. And in fact, the number of art lending agencies has multiplied dramatically, and essentially these are people that are prepared to lend money either against galleries, against collector inventory, against future finance transactions, at an auction house. And so there are many ways in which you can participate in the art market using credit resources, and I think that expands and grows the market. And so this is an area where it's not clear to me how this will play out, but it's based on the assumption that artworks are are assets and have an underlying value. And so long as the finance community continues to treat artwork as an asset, I think you'll see a continued growth in the art market as more and more money gets poured into it. No, I mean, most art fairs devote space to institutional booths. For instance, the Byler Museum has a booth at the Basel Fair, the New Museum has a booth at the Armory Show, and usually what these booths are an opportunity for the institution to sell prints or raise money. And so most art fairs will support non-profit institutions that they have a relationship in some way. So they say we provide several booths at the Armory Show at a very discounted rate or free of charge to non-profit museums in and around New York. Well, I mean, it's very clear that art is a financial asset. I mean, UBS may not lend directly against art, but it outsources the lending of art or lending against art by its clients to third-party banks. They just simply don't want it on the balance sheet. But firstly, UBS is one of the largest corporate collectors of art in the world. They value their asset as far as their balance sheet is concerned. They may not lend directly against art, but they certainly outsource lending for their clients to other banks. There are dozens of banks around the world that will lend against art assets, sometimes independently or sometimes against a sort of a basket of collateral. There are banks that will lend galleries money to purchase spaces or to finance participation in art fairs. So clearly the finance community treats art and galleries as functioning businesses and artworks as assets. How they value those assets, I think, is up to them. Certainly artworks are more complicated assets than stocks, right? High transaction costs, low liquidity. But I think to say that UBS doesn't value art as an asset, I wouldn't think that's correct. They're certainly invested in making relationships with collectors at fairs. They underwrite the Art Basel franchise. I think it's a really good question. I think the answer to your question is yes, that being contemporary today in 2016 really means being global. It also means being local, but it very much means being global, at least having an understanding of what's happening globally and making work or operating or being able to speak a language that allows you to participate in a global conversation. And I mean that not just for artists, for curators, for critics, for art fair directors as well. So I would agree with you that being contemporary today really means being global.